God bless America, because this is DG Chichester, and you are listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.
Greetings, Cap fans. Welcome to episode 144 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. I'm your host. This is Rick Verbanis. And as always, I am joined by the best gosh darn co-host out there. That is Mr. Bob Lucius. Oh, Bob. As far as you and I as a team, you can forget it. This ought to prove I mean business when I say from now on, Rick fights alone. So let's just shake and say it's been a gag. I owe you a lot, but now I have to get into my own bag. Dig?
I have no idea what you're going on about, Rick.
No?
No,
that's the Falcon talking to Steve Rogers, Captain America.
Right. I was like, man, it sounds like the Falcon, but it's got to be from a movie.
No, totally.
Oh, all right.
Dig. Yeah. Do you dig? Yeah. Can you dig it?
Can you dig it?
Yeah. No, that is the Falcon breaking up with Captain America. Now I know you kind of felt like, oh, okay. Maybe Rick's breaking up with me, because especially after we had James Foley on a few episodes ago, we were kind of talking about having a little bit of a audition for a new host.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
New co-host, I should say.
Co-host, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I would never do that.
We should do that. That would be great. That'd be great to see.
I would never do that. But yeah, that's the Falcon breaking up with Cap. But guess what issue of Captain America that's from?
Oh my God. I can't I don't know.
I'm just going to tell you, Bob, because you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
It's issue 144.
I was going to say 148.
Yeah. Well, were you? Okay.
At some point.
I had to tie it in with episode 144, issue 144.
All right.
It's actually also, this you could say it's a key issue, Bob, because during that conversation that he was having with Steve, he goes behind this little area. He changes out of his uniform into his brand new red and white Falcon uniform, because before that it was the green uniform.
Yeah.
Right. During that conversation was he breaking into his red and white uniform. Is it introduction? Kind of, I don't know. Is that a little bit of a minor key? What do you think?
I think so. I think it should be, at least. Yeah. Rick, I can't get the audition thing out of my head. I'm thinking about, those SNL skits where they have like the different
movies when they have different actors trying out for
like Star Wars roles. Or something.
Oh yeah,
or something like that, right?
Christopher Walken.
Yeah, and I was like, how cool would that be? We should have a bunch of different Marvel characters, Captain America characters, trying out to be your new co-host.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Actually, you know what? Here's the funny thing. I love the character idea. I don't know who we'd get to do that, but we should totally, every time we have a nightcap guest on, we should do like a little mock, be the co-host with Rick.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Give him a shot at fame.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Is that what you have, Bob? Do you have fame?
Oh, I do. Fame. I want to live forever. Baby, remember my name forever. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
How's your week going, Bob?
Rick, this has been a tough week, man.
Oh, no.
I haven't talked to you since last Tuesday, but on Friday, Thursday night, I'm on my way home. I stop, grocery store, get some pizza dough. Gonna go home, gonna make a breakfast pizza for the family.
Are you gonna make a little doughboy?
Yeah, right. I'm gonna make a little doughboy figure, right? Go in, come out, car won't start.
Oh no.
Yeah, but everything's working. Lights, radio, everything's good. Car won't start.
Okay, so the power's working, but the engine's not turning.
I'm like, well, maybe it's not. Maybe the battery's a little low or something. So I go home.
How do you get home?
Uber.
Oh, that sucks.
Wait for my wife to get home. Take her car. Go back. I got one of those little battery packs. You have one of those?
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah,
they're awesome, right?
Yeah,
awesome.
It's like yeah. I keep one in my car. I don't keep it in somebody else's car. Just FYI.
Yeah. Well, I don't keep it in my car because it gets so dang hot down here that I'm afraid it'll blow up. So I go home. I get it. It doesn't work, right? So the next morning, I'm like, all right, no problem. 8:15. I Uber back over to the grocery store and I call AAA. Because I got AAA. I had AAA for years.
Oh, I saw this on Facebook about AAA. Yeah, it took
7.5 hours.
That's ridiculous.
They come. Right?
No.
Yeah, 7.5 hours. But I can't go home because I don't know when they're coming. So
exactly.
I sat on like a bench out front of the grocery store for 7.5 hours with my notebook, taking notes for work. Right. So I finally get the car towed.
You weren't doing research for the podcast?
Oh, sure it was. Yeah. Okay. And then they can't look at it on Friday. They look at it on Monday. Monday, they look at it. I don't hear all day. Call them. They said, oh, I think it's something on the gear shift, a little solenoid, stock, shift solenoid, $25 part. No big deal. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's good.
$500.
Today I call. Labor. Like, oh yeah, it was something a little different, and it was $2,800.
What?
$2,800, and it's a known problem with it's a 2009 Nissan Altima. They had a recall that ended in 2020. Yeah, and it's just,
dude, you went over 1,000 times the original estimate.
Yeah. So and then they saw some other things.
Well, no, 100 times. Sorry, 100
They saw some other stuff that was wrong. So I mean, if I got everything, it would be like $3,500. I'm like, So I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna, it's a 2009. It's got 120,000 miles on it.
How many miles?
120.
That's not a lot.
Well, it's not a 2009.
No, dude, I have a 2007. I'm driving.
All right. Well,
of course, my car is also in the shop. So,
so today, but cars are so expensive. Even used cars are so expensive now. Really I cannot bring myself to like buy a car because I think about all the stuff I could buy if somebody would just give me that money.
all the collectibles you could buy.
Exactly, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm not going to get anything for years.
I'm like, I could buy a really cool piece of art.
Exactly, right? I'm like trying to find a way to like, how can I magically make this fix happen? But I know that like, even if I put that, it'd be something else a month from now.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at cars and then I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to
wait. I thought you had a Jeep.
I don't have a Jeep.
I thought you had like some sort of, no.
No.
When I got you that Christmas gift a few years ago with the light on the Captain America shield on the door, you were like, oh, I'm going to wait till I get my new car to put that on. Which new car?
Waiting, man.
Are you kidding me? Are you freaking kidding me?
I'm not kidding you.
Oh my God. You are the worst.
I've been thinking about this for years about getting a new vehicle.
Worst. You're like, oh no. It's a Captain America collectible. I can't take it out of the box.
There's that too, but
right? Is that what we're dealing with here?
No, as soon as I get a car, I'm not going to put it on my 2009 Nissan Altima.
Why not?
Because I park on a dirt road. And that's the other thing is I work on a dirt road. It's like 3 miles on a dirt road one way, right? So I'm like, what kind of car am I going to? My wife's like, oh, you should like get a blah, blah, Jeep? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, and I'm going to drive it like 6 miles dirt road every day? No, I don't want to do that. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
No,
I don't want to. So, anyway, so, where's the last place you should put the title for a car?
Well, certainly in the car.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So
that would be a bad idea.
I'm looking for the title and I'm like, where the hell's the title? Because that car is in her name and her car is in my name. That was her car. I had an Xterra. We got rid of the car. She bought this new car. She drives that one. I got her old car. I'm like, honey, where's the title? And she's like, oh, I think it's in the glove box. I'm like, at the shop, right? Because I want to like set up this like to get it
Uh.
hauled away and get like $1,000 in cash, you know. So I don't have to get it fixed. I can just get it money for parts or whatever.
Yeah.
Now I got to drive over there.
Uh-huh.
So I go to get a rental car today, and I want like a compact because I don't have any problem with my male ego, and a compact is fine, and it's easy to park. And
You
they're all
look
out.
great in a Prius.
Yes, and they're all out. So what do they give me? A Ram 1500 pickup truck. So it's like a big boat, you know.
Yeah.
Driving down
Absolutely.
the road in my big
When
boat.
did you try the horn? You had to try the
I
horn.
haven't
right?
tried the horn yet.
Oh,
No.
come on.
No.
No?
Yeah.
I'm sure it's like got like a general lead. Whatever.
Right. Yeah. Like that Southern horn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That you sent me there. I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah. On
I like
Facebook.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was nice.
Oh, bless your heart. Could you just move over a touch?
Just keep. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm sorry you're having that kind of week, Bob.
Yeah.
But we're here to talk about Captain America.
Oh,
That's
right.
always something to cheer people up, right?
It is. It is. Yeah. Yeah. This is going to be a good show tonight. I'm excited about tonight.
Oh, yeah. We do have Dan, or should we call him DG Chichester, on the show tonight, which is great because, he's a prolific writer from the 1990s. He wrote, over 200 different stories, and I had a 4-year run on Daredevil, but he also, wrote some Captain America. And so we absolutely looking forward to talking to him about that tonight.
Yeah. He has a lot of detail in his writing. And of course, he wrote a lot with Margaret Clark, but a lot of just like topical details, little hidden stuff, little references, pop culture references. It's going to be fun to talk to him about some of that stuff.
Yeah, 100%. So before we get to that, though, let's just take a look and see if there are any comic book industry professional birthdays coming up. Now, this particular episode, I'm not sure when it's going to air because the Blood and Glory kind of ran an extra week there. So John Byrne had a birthday on July 6th.
John Byrne. That name sounds familiar.
Yeah, you might have heard of him. He did a few comics here and there.
Here and there. Yeah.
Just a few.
Yeah.
Just a few. Big fan of John Byrne. I always felt like he drew the standard for what the character was supposed to look like, and then all the others artists kind of like compare up to him.
That's high praise.
It is. Like, when he did like the faces up in the icon box, on the cover, whether the Avengers faces or Fantastic Four or the X-Men, all the major groups, right? In Marvel, whatever that face looked like, it was like, that's the standard, so always a huge John Byrne fan. And this year was the first time I actually got myself some John Byrne art. I got a couple pages, so I'm really blessed that way and very excited and always looking for more. Us collectors, we're never satisfied,
right?
And then birthday on July 13th is Tom Palmer. Now, Tom Palmer is a prolific artist in the, done a lot of inking over the years. Man, he actually has worked on, I'm just looking it up now, but over 800 different stories since, since the late 1960s, all the way up to not too long ago in 2020. I mean, what a career! The man's a legend. Happy birthday, Mr. Palmer.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. Oh, Bob, you know that contest we had as far as giving away the Taco Bell Captain America exclusive collector's edition?
Yo quiero Taco Bell.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
That particular comic. Yeah, we said that if we get the next 3 reviews that we get on Apple Podcasts giving us a 5-star review, one of those 3 will actually win this comic. Well, we just got our third of those 3. And do you want me to go ahead and read it to you?
Oh, I do.
All right. This one is from D-Dog 123.
D-Dog 123. All right.
123. Yeah. Now, it could be just D-Dog 123.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
It's hard to believe there were 122 other D-Dogs.
Yeah. Is it hard to believe? I mean, come on. At this point, right? I mean, the internet's been around for a little bit now.
No, my first Xbox name, the one that my son still is Ultimate Mega 340. So there were 339 Ultimate Megas before.
Is that how that worked? Okay.
Yeah. So
excellent. Well, it's great that your son's carrying that legacy. All right. So this one's titled "They Can Do This All Day."
And sometimes we do.
Yeah. I got that reference. All right. So here is D-Dog 123. He says, or she says, they say, I was part of the Captain America comic book fans Facebook page and started to notice these podcasts put out by Rick and Bob. I didn't think much of it until I had a long road trip coming up and thought I'd try this out. Wow. I thought I was a Cap buff, but these guys make me look like a piker. The knowledge and depth they present from week to week is amazing, but the humor and camaraderie between the two is what makes the show. I picture Rick on the motorcycle and Bob in the sidecar cruising down the road
like a basset hound,
enjoying American culture through the eyes of our favorite Marvel hero. Listen now. What are you waiting for?
Wow, what are you waiting for?
I'm picturing you in the sidecar, with the goggles.
Oh yeah, with my ears flapping in the wind. Yeah, right. That's awesome.
Oh, that is so cool. I
used to have a motorcycle with a sidecar. So
with the sidecar, I knew you had a motorcycle. I didn't know you had a sidecar.
I did when I lived in Vietnam. Yeah.
Oh,
so
and so you had about 18 people on it.
Yeah, that's right. My wife would not ride in it.
No, is it because she knew what kind of driver you were?
Pretty much, and it was just taking your life into your hand every time you went out on the road there. So, but yeah, good times. So I would definitely jump into your sidecar, Rick.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Yeah.
That's really sweet. No, I thank you, D-Dog 123. We appreciate that. Now, come back next episode because we will do a random drawing of one of these 3 to win this contest.
Yep.
All right.
Wow, that's awesome.
Excellent. Bob, you know what? DG Chichester's been waiting pretty long in the green room. Should we bring him on?
All right. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Our guest today started his comic career as an editor in the mid-1980s, started writing in late 1980s, but quickly became a prolific writer in the 90s, writing several long runs for Marvel, including Nick Fury, Elektra, Night Stalkers, and more. He may be best known for his 4-year run on Daredevil, which included classic stories such as Fall of the Kingpin and Fall from Grace. For Cap fans, you may know him for writing the Cap Annual number 10, as well as the 3-part prestige series, Punisher, Captain America, Blood and Glory. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. It's a thrill to be here, both just to talk comics in general, Captain America specifically, and one of my favorite series, which is Blood and Glory. So it never got quite the attention I wanted to back in the day. So we're going to give it to it right now.
Exactly. Yeah, you came to the right place. And so let's talk a little bit about your career. So you spent the last 20 plus years in marketing. Recently, you were the chief experience officer for an advertising agency that specializes in healthcare. But more recently, you've been doing freelance marketing, writing, and creative and strategic consulting. But prior to that, you spent 15 years in the comic industry as editor and writer. Now you're returning to comics after a long hiatus, and we certainly want to get to that later in the show. But let's talk about the beginning of your career. So you were a student at NYU studying filmmaking, and you land a job at Marvel as an assistant to the assistant of editor-in-chief Jim Shooter. By the way, we had Jim on the show, he's a great guy.
He is.
How did you get that role?
That's an important distinction, the assistant to the assistant too. Yes. How did I get that role?
What did it entail too? I'm curious.
Well, making films at NYU, at least at that point, and probably still at any film school, they gave you a certain amount of supplies, which was barely enough to load the camera. After that, you're kind of on your own. So I burned through what they gave me, and then I borrowed more money from my parents than I was already borrowing to go to school, and ran through everything. Made my student film, which got me nowhere. But
what was it about?
It was actually an adaptation of a story that was in Twilight Zone magazine, which was called Wanna Bet, and it was a twisted little, tight little tale about a kid who's going through the old kid insults back and forth, step on a crack, break your mother's back, these sort of things, and in classic quote unquote Twilight Zone fashion, they come true. It turns out that this kid has the power to make these things come true. And it was just got a tight little one-page story, and I thought it was so great and had such a little twist to it. It felt like it would make a neat little genre sort of film. So put my money into it, and it took me the better part of 20 odd years after that to actually get around to editing it. But we made the film, successfully, brought a crew together and did that. But you're left with really nothing in the bank. You've invested all of your extra money to buy the footage and process the film. These are back in the days when processing film was a thing, and had run through everything. Didn't want to go borrow more from my parents, who were already being quite generous, and went to the student employment office, and amongst all the other things up on the wall, typist at Marvel Comics. So I'm in the screenwriting program. I type really fast. I had read comics religiously up to the point I was about 13 or 14, and then for reasons I really couldn't tell you why, sort of stopped cold. But in my brain, it said, well, geez, I kind of know these characters, don't I? And this sounds like this could be just a good, easy way to make a couple of bucks in a interesting environment. If you're going to type somewhere, you may as well type Marvel Comics, right?
Right.
So I went up there, and it was actually in the foreign licensing division. And I walked in, and I started the interview, and somebody else came in and said, geez, yeah, we just gave that job to so-and-so. But the interview was going well enough, I guess, that the guy I was interviewing with was, well, you seem like you've got your head on your shoulders. Lynn Cohen, who is Jim Shooter's assistant, is looking for somebody. Is looking for an assistant to herself. Why don't you go down and talk to her? I was a warm body, probably, and Lynn would have taken anybody, but hopefully maybe there was a little bit more to that. And so I landed the job, even with all my caveats around it, because the typist job was very flexible, or sounded like it was going to be very flexible. To be the assistant to the editor-in-chief was going to be a lot more demanding. But I said, I still have classes. I'm still, my schedule is not 100% here. Are you okay with that? And so she was. So I would do classes mostly in the mornings and then come up there in the afternoon. And the job was a little bit of everything. It was amazing in the sense that I was literally at the center of everything. You're outside of Shooter's office, so you're hearing, I'm going to do my bad Jim Shooter impression. It's very deep voice.
Oh, let's hear it. We want to hear it.
Oh, that was about it. Jim Shooter. That's about as good as I can do. So you're hearing him go on things, give advice, be funny, but you're doing everything from art returns to artists to answering the phone when kids from Tennessee call up wanting to know who can beat who. You know, there's a kid who would literally call every day at 3:30. Can Spider-Man beat the Hulk? Can the Hulk beat Thor? Can Thor beat? Every day it was somebody different. You know, it was before you had, you know, Wikipedia or Google. I guess I was the guy. And so I'd make the stuff up on the spot to the point that people would know this kid was going to call at 3:30, and they'd sort of congregate around the desk, you know, waiting for him to call. We put it on speakerphone and answer the kid's, you know, call. It must have been hell on long distance. You know, if Shooter needed something weird around town, at one point, Jack Abel, who's a well-known inker and talent, he wanted to get him a stuffed toy turkey. So it was like, Dan, go find a stuffed toy turkey, you know. It would be, and I would have to go out in the streets of New York again before you could sort of just jump on Google and know that store X has it. And I'd have to go around to gag shops and things and find a stuffed toy turkey to bring back to the office. Lot of you know, art submissions. I was semi in charge of that on certain days. People sending in their samples, mostly sending them no prizes or no thanks, you know, letters, evaluating it from there. And then every now and again, something a little bit more creative or editorial in nature. Most famously for me, at least, was Bernie Wrightson was doing a Spider-Man graphic novel called Hooky, which was kind of an unusual thing for, you remember that one? And
yeah. That was wasn't that like it was a graphic novel that was kind of like an oversized kind of graphic novel?
One of the first contracted, but maybe one of the last printed of that certain type of graphic novel size.
Yeah, a little bit larger, yeah.
Right.
Like around the same size as like the, you know, X-Men God Loves, Man Kills.
Exactly. It was part of the same initial, that's kind of where the term graphic novel came out of, was those particular ones. But I was doing pagination and some you know, page numbering and that sort of thing on it. Very rudimentary stuff. And that always stood out in my mind because it was just part of my job. But when I left the company at the end of the semester and went back home for the summer, Jim Shooter was nice enough to actually send me a payment for doing that extra work, even though it wasn't extra work, which really always impressed me, you know, that he went to the time and trouble to kind of write a voucher out, you know, for me for a, you know, a fee, which was only a couple $100, but at that time it was a couple $100 to a college kid, and it was wow.
Right.
So it was a little bit of everything, you know, and if Lynn needed the desks watched or washed, you know, somewhere in between there, I was the guy. And so I got to meet pretty much everybody, because everybody was coming in to see Jim Shooter, or I was being sent to every corner of the office to take stuff around and get signed or get approved or followed up on. I didn't hardly know what I was doing and was terribly insecure about most of it, but it was a great central place to be and have a first gig at.
And this, how did this lead into you getting an editorial role?
Well, I went home at the end of the semester, which was unimaginable to everybody. You're leaving? What? You're what do you mean you're leaving? You can't possibly be leaving. Not because I was so great, but just simply because nobody gets a job at Marvel and then leaves. But I had already committed to a summer job back in Connecticut, and that was frankly paying a lot more as well than the Marvel gig was. And so I went and just took that job. And about 3/4 of the way through the summer, I got a call from Joe Duffy in the Epic department. Now, I hadn't had much interaction with the Epic Comics department, which was the creator-owned imprint at that point in time. And but she said, well, you know, we sort of remember you coming around. We heard really good things about you. We need an assistant, you know, for the department. Would you be interested? And I was flattered, flabbergasted, and but also I had to give her the same caveats. I said, I have one more semester. My schedule will be, you know, intermittent. But she was all for it, and to me, it was my plan was to go into filmmaking, right? I was going to leave. I was going to move right to Hollywood. You'd be talking to, you know, Steven Spielberg, you know, 2.0 right now. But but they were into it, and to me, it was okay. This is a gig, and this will be a gig right after I finish school, because I was going to graduate early in December. You know, I'll have something to act as a bridge while I get my act together, and that was the plan. So I moved into that position, and then became an assistant for not only Joe Duffy, but also, well, most importantly, Archie Goodwin, who ran the group. And Archie was Archie, so you don't have a better teacher or influence than somebody like that to really gain insight. And also the fact that Epic was creator owned, I got exposure to a lot more, I think, eclectic titles and a different sort of level of production value based upon the way that they were producing books versus the rest of the Marvel line. So happy circumstance that worked out pretty well for me.
So you then left an editing role at Marvel in 1989.
Yes.
And so take us through your thinking at that time, and what did that lead to?
Well, these are excellent questions. I wasn't paid a lot as an editor, right? No, nobody was. In fact, there was some exchange on Twitter in the last couple of days. I don't know, people talking about how comics ruined you, or hard knocks in comics. I don't know what it is, but like Fabian Nicieza was putting up like what his editorial salary was. I don't remember what my editorial salary was. I remember my assistant editorial salary was $21,000, and which, even by the standard of time, was nothing to live on in New York City. And everybody supplanted their or tried to supplant their salaries with freelance, you know, which is why you would certainly see a lot of editorial names showing up in creative credits. People wanted to create, but some people just had to create to try to supplant their income with anything from coloring to inking. And a lot of great people learn their craft that way. I wanted to be a writer, right? That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to direct. I wanted to be a writer. This was my you know, my charge in life. I think I was a pretty good editor. I think I became a much better editor over time. And then I had the happy circumstance again to work with really amazing people, from Mark DeMatteis to Pat Mills on martial law, really crackerjack writers who I felt intimidated by, but I was also learning by editing them, right? Or trying to kind of steer them in a certain way. So my decision, you know, came about because I felt I needed to kind of move into a direction of what I really wanted to do, which was write and be my own creative person, even though I didn't feel I was necessarily creatively secure enough to do it. But there had also been a big shakeup in the Epic department. When Jim Shooter was forced out, left, fired, whatever the you know the circumstance or story, you know, you pick up on, you know, from there was just a huge shift, and he had sort of treated Epic and Archie a certain way. Without him there, Epic was perceived less as a kind of a jewel, I would say, and more just as, oh, you guys are just doing different books with different characters, and we're going to just kind of pull this all in and muck it up in its own way. That's a very jaded way of looking at it. But it sort of upset the balance of how we sort of perceived ourselves as a group, which may have been too arrogant, and probably was, but it made us the ones who remained, I think, feel a little less special. And for me, that also sort of pushed me toward, all right, well, if this isn't what I'm going to be part of, then why don't I again try and go do more of what I want to do? So I really just, which is writing. And so I really made the decision to, I'm going to go do this. I was young and stupid enough to feel like I could. But I didn't have anything when I decided to do it. So when I decided to go freelance, I was saying, well, geez, other people can do it. But I quickly was able to line up a few things by going in and pitching myself. I think most not easily, but I think the first one was probably some of the Clive Barker work I was doing. The Nightbreed book, I think, was the first one I was able to go in and pitch myself on, and
well, I'm
secure
looking
that.
at your list here.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, according to Mike's Amazing World, which is a great
Mm-hmm.
place to go and find.
Sure.
So your first written credit, which was
Yes.
in 1987,
Mm-hmm.
which was the Justice number 12. And then you were doing
Yes.
the Epic line, right? You did Dr. Zero and Powerline and St.
St.
George,
George. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And then you did those all the way to the end, and then did the Critical Mass, which was that
Right.
right, that
Right.
miniseries that kind
Big
of
maxi series. Right. But
right.
those I was writing while I was still on staff. So those were, and
Okay.
those I was doing with Margaret Clark. She was my co-writer on those, but those were all co-written with her, as was Blood and Glory.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so when I went out on my own, um, that was also a decision to write on my own. Right.
Okay.
I was not writing with her any longer, and that's both a sort of I've got to learn to do this on my own, and also that's a financial thing. When I would write with her, you're splitting the page rate. They're not paying us double page rate. We're getting whatever it is, and then we're having to cut it in half. And the decision to work together at that point was initially based around I didn't feel secure enough in my skill set to do it on my own,
Mm-hmm.
and she was having a harder time, to my memory, um, just cracking through a little bit as a woman. I would say,
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't getting as much play or respect as she should have for a very thoughtful, talented writer. And the feeling was that the combination of the two of us, would allow us to crack through my insecurity and her, may, real or perceived sexism, around that. So, and we started to get some traction,
Mm-hmm.
but then it was really the Epic books, the Shadowline books, those three series, which was probably the biggest, push for both of us, and I think also helped us a little bit in terms of profile, but for me, really helped in terms of just learning the craft. Like the consistency of that many titles and that many interrelated titles
Mm-hmm.
was just a way to improve your skill set simply by muscle memory, if nothing else.
So can you take us through how the two of you worked together when you and Margaret, did one of you do the plot and the other one the scripts, or did you combine? Did you take, I'll do this page, you do this page? How did you work together?
Yeah, we had until the end, which we can talk about in a little bit. We had a really great working relationship on it, and it was a real. It was just an open, discussion of sitting around, the table or whatever, and talking out loud what's going to happen next, and then one or the other of us would type it up. I think very often I'd be typing it up as we were discussing it, but it wasn't like I would go off and do it on my own. We would literally talk through, all right, what happens next? We'd be writing it down, and then we would type up the plot structure, and then as we would start to do the script, because we were mostly working in the old school Marvel style, where you would write a plot first, so you'd have the incidences, that might be page 1 to 4, this happens, page 5 and 6, this happens. And then the artist would illustrate that, then you would get the artwork back, and then you would go through and you would write the script. So then when we would get the artwork back, we would go through and you'd have the art there, and then you would say, okay, Dr. Zero's in this panel, what's he going to say? What are the captions? And we would just talk it back and forth. And yeah, occasionally, we would sit there and mull something. And, so one or the other of us would write something down and then say, what do you think of this? But it was a very, fluid exchange in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I might have typed up more of it as we went along, just because I was a faster typist, right? I was going to have a typist job at one point. And but yeah, it was a really good exchange of ideas, and we were generally on the same page, in that back and forth. And we're pretty good about calling BS on each other as well, which cut through the preciousness, around things. It's not going to work. Let's move on. Or that's not working for me. Okay, well, I'm not going to try to over convince you. We'll find something else.
So if it wasn't you and it was Bob talking, this is the part where I would cut in and have a tangent.
Okay.
That's my typical thing. So I'm going to apologize in advance, but you brought up the whole typing thing, right? And I've been meaning to ever since you said that, you found the job as a typist. Now, you and I talked a little off air about, some similar career paths and things like that. I went to school and my I was a communication major, but my goal was to someday write and direct. And and then when I got out of school, I realized I didn't want to go to Hollywood and be Spielberg 2.0. And I didn't want to go work with unions and things like that. So I went the marketing route instead. But anyway, my biggest regret, Dan, is I never took a typing class. If someone had told me back in the 80s, you would be spending this much time on a keyboard,
right,
I totally would have taken a typing class. But here's the really 80s sexist thing that's coming out, right? Is that when I had an option in high school to take a typing class, I was like, I'm not going to need that. I'm going to have an assistant.
See, I went the other way, where we had a typing class in high school, and I said to myself, you know what? I bet you that's an easy A to like boost my grade point average. And over the summer, I taught myself to type by using this old school typing book.
Nice.
They had this book that you would sort of like literally flip through. And so I spent the whole summer learning how to type, so that when I took the typing class, I aced it from day one. And so I didn't care that I was maybe the only guy in the class or whatever. I just said, here's an A. It's going to take me nothing at all to do it. I'm sure it was an elective, but it was a nice, easy, cheap way to boost the grade point average, and worked out well as the future gave us keyboards. And
oh my God, biggest regret. I really wish I took that in school.
And I took typing because that's where all the girls were.
See?
So
that's why he's the brains of the group. He's the brains of the group.
It's the Goldilocks of the group. Yeah, it's sort of like, oh, you went there and I went here, but this was the sweet spot for me.
That's it.
It's all perfect.
So talking about writing and your time with Margaret and how that has progressed, and of course you've been a prolific writer well on your own for a lot. I've heard you talk about, when you talk about writing, that you like to write in fragments. Can you describe to the listeners what that means, and how does that result in a finished product?
That was such a great question when you sent it to me, and you clearly did your research and picked up on that from wherever I mentioned it. This newsletter I have, which we'll mention at the end, I ended up calling this thing Story Maze, because it sort of felt like I kind of named it after this mental image of I guess how I write and how I think about stories. And I've tried every story technique and software over the years, you can imagine. I paid hundreds of dollars, probably thousands of dollars on stupid things, the story engine, Dramatica, this thing or the other thing, where you're supposed to input characters and they're going to be combined with some Joseph Campbell, format, and it's going to output, hero's journey and saving the cats and stuff. And I respect a lot of them, but I've also come to realize that when I've worked the best, it's been this sense of allowing a lot of inputs to come in, a lot of things I'll read, a lot of things I'll amass, a lot of influences, quotes, inspirations, sometimes not even knowing what good they're going to serve. But if I feed the beast and I fuel the mind, as it were, what happens is I sit down to create a free-form story, or even a particular assignment story, is a couple of things will happen. Especially when I'm working in comics or for comics, is I beat everything out. almost going back to that visual filmmaking idea. So I'm seeing shots, I'm seeing moments in time more than I'm seeing maybe a complete story, but I'm seeing it so it works. I'll know when the sequence of visuals or the sequence of beats doesn't feel right, and I'll start crossing things out. So that's one type of fragment, just simply the visual beats, and I will go down notepads, and all I'll have is, door, desk, vase. And in my mind, I know that vase is supposed to fall off the desk and it's supposed to break. And that's kind of my beat sheet to feel that there's a sequence of action or a sequence of emotion, or this equals so many panels per page or whatever. And very often, I'll also just be coming up with fragments of dialogue, fragments of dialogue and fragments of emotions and scenes that I will capture, and I will almost find myself then reverse engineering out from there. What is that line? Why is he saying that line? Or what does that line even mean? And then I'll just kind of almost mind map my way back out from that, if you're familiar with mind mapping, without formally mind mapping it, but almost kind of, starting with this inspirational line or this visual scene, and then just kind of crafting it back out. And it's a lot of crossing things out and ripping the page out and rewriting it as I recognize I run into a dead end. But I've also recognized it works pretty well for me. It ultimately seems to end up with, if not bulletproof storytelling, at least storytelling that I'm comfortable with, that is hitting beats and that I can look through and say, yes, I've always liked to try to accomplish things that have that feeling of great turns, great scenes, great lines, as opposed to muddling people just sort of sitting around tables, talking or whatever. Probably just, too much of a 90s, film, too much time in 90s movie theaters,
All right. So now this is the part of the show that we are contractually obligated to talk about Captain America.
Oh my gosh, him. Yes, of course. I've heard of this character.
Right. I mean, you thought we were here to talk about Rick's decision making around typing classes, but in fact, we're here to talk about Captain America. So I think, Dan, your first Cap work was on the Captain America Annual number 10 that came out in May 1991. And that was the conclusion of the Von Strucker Gambit, which was a 3-part story that I think the first part appeared in the Daredevil Annual that year, and then the second part was in the Punisher Annual. And this was around the same time that you were writing Daredevil, which also featured the Punisher in the first story arc. Similarly, you were Nick Fury he played a major part in that story, and you had been writing that series for quite some time. But you were new to Captain America at this point.
Right.
So, what did you do to prepare yourself to get into Steve Rogers' head?
I think it's the same thing I'll always do, which is invest myself in what exists. So, Mark Grunwald was the writer at that point, and I think had a pretty deep imprint on the character. So there was certainly a lot of reading around the works that he was doing, and just sort of feeling that kind of influence of him, not trying to emulate him, but knowing that I'm always very respectful, or try to be very respectful, if I'm picking up on characters that I don't quote unquote own. I don't want to go in and suddenly, tromp all over and say, well, this is the way to do it, or this is my way of doing it. I try to find something that's of the essence of the character. If I like it, if I think somebody's completely done, a BS job on it, that might be totally different, coming into it. But Mark's interpretation, I always found there was a lot to like about it. So the solidity of that would probably have been, the way I kind of came into it. And I think it's also ultimately my affection and appreciation of the character, which in a lot of ways would lead to Blood and Glory, was always looking at him as a soldier, right? That was my feeling about him. That was my thinking about him. So I think the combination of the two is really what allowed me to kind of get in to that and then use him in that way. Did I write all this Von Strucker Gambit stuff? I kind of think I did.
No, no.
I think that
some. I think you had something in the Punisher annual, but not the Daredevil one.
Right. All right. Because I know I sat down with the co-writers, and I think we all did one of those brain meld deals, and we sort of we'd come up with all the baton passes before doing it, and that was allowed it to sort of be a little bit more seamless, and then pick up on it in the right way.
So in that annual, you also wrote a little story in the beginning. It was like it's just a 2-page recap of Cap's origin.
Yeah.
And which has got to be cool, right? I mean, you
oh yeah.
Here you are, and you're redoing, you're retelling an iconic character like Captain America's origin. So that's got to have been pretty cool. But you wrote, this was interesting to me, Rogers underwent a grueling battery of oral, intravenous, and radiation treatments. And I found this interesting because you combined all the various versions of Cap's origin. Because in Captain America Comics #1, back in the 40s, Steve received a shot. And then in Captain America 255 by Roger Stern and John Byrne, Steve took a serum. And then he was hit by Vita rays. So was it your idea to include all the previous versions, or was this editorial directed?
I wish I could. I wish my brain still functioned. I wish I had some Vita rays for my brain to sort of tell you specifically. Yeah. But I got away. I think I knew enough of what I was doing, and I had some very good editors. I rarely got notes or undue influence that I was not happy with. So I didn't feel like anything was kind of put forward on that. I think it probably came about naturally, and you've probably put more thought into the interpretation of it than I did in actually writing that, right now, in the sense that I think I just read to prepare for that. I think I just, again, saturated myself in enough Cap lore and, a combination of the Marvel Universe handbooks and whatever else was around the office, and sort of just taking a couple notes and saying, okay, well, he's this, and this. And then how do you, those 2-page things are economies of language and pressure testing. You're trying to cram so much stuff into those quick jumping off points or wrapping up things. Oh, yeah. So I think that was probably both the research and maybe a happy accident of well, he did this, and this. So why don't I just put them all together in one caption, and now let's get to my story.
And I think writers maybe had taken that further on, because future origin retellings were a combination. So a little bit of both. All right, so let's take a look at your Punisher Captain America Blood and Glory series. This was a prestige format 3-issue miniseries, which ran about 150 pages. And that's like the size of most trade paperback collections. When you started each issue, the 3 issues, you started with a thought-provoking quote from social commentators. And so respectively, that was Will Rogers, Gene Roston, and George Bernard Shaw. What was your thinking here to start each one of these with these quotes?
It was while the book was certainly commercially generated, in a certain way, by myself and Margaret, especially, we wanted to kind of leapfrog our profile, and what better way, than using a very popular character of the day, the Punisher, and combining him with a character we really liked, trying to recruit Klaus, Janson, to it as well. So there's a lot of commercial touch points to getting it going and pitching it. I think it quickly became something more meaningful for us, the way we looked at the characters and the story that we wanted to tell. So being a little snobbish and intellectual, throwing a quote at the beginning of certain things that means something, or tries to kind of proposition that there's a theme or there's elements to this that are maybe just beyond the action adventure of the story, was certainly the intention. I think a good quote like that can be a crutch, but it can also just get you in a mindset of this is how I, the author or the creator or one of the creators, would like you to be sitting forward or back in your seat as we get into the story. I may fail at accomplishing that for the rest of the 48 pages or whatever, but I, that was always the thinking, that there's a little bit more going on here, or a lot more going on here, hopefully, with the story and what it was about and what it meant for those characters.
I think Rick will tell you, he'll be the first one to tell you that I often talk about the fact that I like Cap stories, that I love entertainment, but I also love a little bit of a moral lesson and a little bit of historical context and depth. And it seemed to me that this book came obviously in the early 1990s, followed on the heel of what occurred in Panama with General Manuel Noriega. And there seemed a lot of parallels with what you did in Blood and Glory, particularly with this General Miguel Navatalalis and Medusa and that whole story, and the resemblances between that character and the Noriega character around weapons trafficking and drug smuggling and shady connections with intelligence agencies. And in fact, in issue 2, you have Navatalalis paraphrase that famous quote from Noriega where he says, "And what does one do with a dog that has rabies?" Which the NSA actually did pick up Noriega saying in communications traffic. So were you trying to make that three issue series topical, a little bit of a moral lesson, and really connecting to that world outside your window, as Stan Lee used to say?
The last part, yes, not a moral lesson so much. Both Margaret and I were big fans of Tom Clancy, type things, that sort of heavily detailed, whatever you want to call it, militarized, fiction, in its own way, but, with enough touches on factual ways of way weapon systems and, clandestine organizations work. And I was I'll say a whore for the current affairs and sociology section of the bookstore. I'd go in and I would, I'd skip the fiction thing if it didn't say Stephen King, and I'd go right to pulling off, the latest and greatest, tome written by whoever, and whatever side of the political aisle, just to kind of get the details. So I had certainly read a lot about everything from Iran Contra to the cartels, and definitely that rabid dog quote, was lifted directly from that. Part of my mindset is not just to rip things off, though sometimes that can work for you. But if there's a great line like that, which it is, use it, right?
Right.
It's and put it to work there, and it gives it felt. The character is clearly influenced and inspired by that, but in that way, I think it also gives a real rawness to probably better than anything I could have come up with. But I would grab, that's part of that fragment thing too. I imagine I had put that line in a clip file at one point or another, and then as we were going through it, it's like, okay, what do I got under the military? What do I got under cartels, and then starting to kind of discover this. I used to have 5 of the 7. I still have them. I'm sure they're over there somewhere. I had to hide them when my kid was younger. I had 5 of the 7 How to Kill books, which were from the old Paladin press, right?
I had a couple of those, right?
I've never seen Bob light up that much.
Boom, like that, right next to my anarchist cookbook.
Right, I had that too.
Yeah. Oh my God.
But a ton of the Punisher stuff from that book came from those. Okay, I heavily researched those How to Kill books, figuring Castle is a killing machine. So the blades he uses, stop the breathing,
start the bleeding,
that whole sequence of lines, promote, establish, shock. That is a tenet of those books, right? So that is directly lifted from there. because to me, this is what he's done. He has researched how to kill people. So it's those kind of things, to get back to that fragment, aspect. I had collected that. And then at the right point in time, oh, well, guess who's going to say those lines? That's of course,
it wasn't going to be Cap.
It wasn't going to be Cap. No, Cap gets the other things to say.
I wondered in real life, of course, Noriega had a tight relationship with the CIA, but you focused on the Defense Intelligence Agency in Blood and Glory. And I was curious about that because I used to work for the DIA. And so
did you really?
I did. Well, I was an attaché for several years overseas. Okay. And so he
carried a case around a lot.
Yeah, right. We talked about that one episode, my little pick case, in case I got arrested or something. I had to.
Oh, you're talking about the stuff in your butt?
Yeah, the stuff, butt cheek. But anyway, different story. But anyway, I think that like the vast majority of Americans don't even know like the DIA exists.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I wondered if this was just like something to spice up the story. It certainly sounds plausible to me. So.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, the sense of, like I said, I would collect a lot of my obscure things or topical things or current affair things. That was something I brought to the writing relationship. And one of the things that I think Margaret always brought really well was incredibly obscure, holy shit, like that's cool references. So, that was, I don't think I had heard of the DIA at that point. She had some government contacts or people that worked in government, friends in it there. I don't know if she'd pulled it from that knowledge base, but, it also, to me, it makes it a little bit more unique, right? I don't think we went into much in the inner workings of the DIA, but everybody had heard of the CIA at that point. Fewer people of the NSA, but still to some extent, they certainly went from no such agency to everybody knowing, who they are. But the DIA was a more out there thing, so it felt like I always like to bring, sometimes to my detriment, slightly more obscure or unique references to things, as opposed to, oh, look, it's just the doomsday device. If there's a doomsday device or something like that, let's have some real thinking behind it. And that was the reason for them as an operating mechanism in that particular, instance.
All right. One more question about the Cap Punisher story. Throughout the series, you had characters parrot commercial lines, like the general "We aim to please," and then you had like Vidal Sassoon's "If you don't look good, we don't look good," and you had Coke's "Have a Coke and a Smile," Dr. Pepper's "Just what the doctor ordered." I mean, you just littered these throughout. First of all, I don't know if was that another way for you to make some side hustle money there? Was this product placement or was this just for fun or
I wish
like social commentary? What was it?
I think that's if anything, I think that's watching a lot of Schwarzenegger movies. I think that's an instance of the 90s, quipism, like let's throw some things in that
I'll buy that for $2.
Exactly, like the inflation, kicks in. Perhaps not picking up on another movie's tagline, in that instance, but conversational, colloquialisms that feel like they're going to resonate well with the audience who's going to see it in 4 months, 5 months, 6 months after you read it. How well it resonates now, 30 years later, people may just say, "Oh, that line works," but they're not going to. They're not going to reference it as a pop culture thing in most cases. It's kind of like reading Stephen King nowadays, and I still think he's a great author, but he's definitely back 10 years with his pop culture references.
Hey, listen, if I listen to music that has come out in the last 20 years, in my mind, I'm listening to new music.
New music, right.
I'm like, oh, hey, look at that. It's I don't know.
It's Britney Spears.
Not quite that bad. Yeah.
She's going somewhere.
Yeah. All right. So speaking of the 1990s, in the late 1990s, Marvel created this new run of what they called cyber comics.
Yes.
And it was an early initiative of digital comics that they published on their website. You wrote a bunch of these, but they didn't end up being quite as popular medium. I mean, they're ahead of their time, and probably too much so, and they didn't really quite catch on. So after the year 2000, cyber comics themselves were removed from the website. Now, unfortunately, those series weren't re-released after their removal, and many of them completely lost. That is until 2011, where one Mr. Dan Chichester posted on YouTube your 4-issue cyber comic that you wrote titled Captain America Iron Man Invasion Force. What prompted you to post this story on YouTube all these years later?
Well, I had done I did 5 of those. I did a Blade movie tie-in. I did a Spider-Man 4-issue 1, an X-Men 4-issue 1, a Fury 4-issue 1, and then the Cap Iron Man 1. And as you note, they didn't catch on. There are others were done. Fabian did some as well. Part of that was technology, right? They were ahead of their time. But they required a certain player, certain file format. Most of them were like available through America Online. They were hidden in some obscure corner of it. A lot of people weren't finding them, but I thought they were. To this day, I look at them and I sort of say, they were kind of doing their own thing that some things still aren't doing. In terms of like some of the interactivity of the story, it wasn't a choose your own adventure thing. There were some like little things you could explore, and you could click on certain things, and certain things would happen, and sometimes it would just change the panel, but sometimes you'd find little hidden clues. So it was somewhere between storytelling and a kind of a fun little hidden items game. And we would think that stuff through, and we would write that up, and then the artist and the programmer would put together those different elements. But they were in a format called Macromedia Director. Was the programming.
Bob's nodding his head.
I remember that.
Yeah. So that was the format that they were in, and while I have always stayed, I think, pretty technically savvy. And ahead of the time, I was getting to the point where I realized these formats are not going to be readable anymore. You're not, you upgrade to the next operating system, you buy the next computer, it doesn't run that anymore because that program no longer exists.
Right.
So I said it's either, retire that with that hard drive, and never be able to look at it again. And then that hard drive is probably going to degrade even if I keep it, or just convert them over to video, which basically just meant playing them and clicking through them and capturing them on video. So they're crude as you've watched them, like you get like chunky sound, and the sound.
Yeah, there's some, at least on the one that you posted on YouTube. And by the way, I'll put the link on our Facebook page.
Yeah.
So listeners, I'll put that out there, and I'll go right to what Chichester had posted on YouTube.
Right.
And it goes, there's 4 issues, there's 4 videos. And then I know 2, 3, and 4 had background noise, right? So some music, some special effects. You didn't hear like the characters talking, which was fine. You read, but you could hear the special effects.
Right. There's looping sound and music or whatever, and then as you would click on certain things or advance certain panels or the dramatics of something happening, something would crash, something would fall over in a panel. As you advance to that panel, you might hear the crash of that. But because it was just a kludgy capture, volumes off and that sort of thing. But anyway, my thinking was, capture them now or forever they'll be gone. And I actually like the stories. I thought that they played out. They were done at a time for me, where I wasn't getting a lot, if any, comics work. And I had actually gone into the Marvel offices, and the woman who was the editor on those initially, and I had gone in and I went in to pitch programming, because I had gotten pretty good at that program, that Macromedia Director, and I knew they had done a couple things like that. And I went in and I said, could I maybe program some of this stuff, just for work? And she was like, well, maybe, but why wouldn't you want to write some?
You're
Which
like,
sort of
okay,
shows where
yeah,
my head was at. And so she gave me the in on a couple of initial ones, and then I continued to work with the editor that came after her until that line died out. We had started a plan for sort of the Cyber Comics 2.0 a little bit, but Marvel just decided, to pull the plug on it. But if I hadn't captured them, I mean, I've had people, inquire over the years. I even had somebody from Marvel at one point contact me and saying, do you have the original files for this? And I don't think I do anymore. I offered to give them the clean version of the videos, but even Marvel didn't have them. So, and I've never seen anybody post any of the other ones, which doesn't mean they don't exist somewhere. But I
sure.
think that's the problem with certain file formats in digital. We think they're kind of they're forever because they're digital, but some of these things just aren't going to run anymore after a point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the story, at least, I watched read the
Right.
Captain America Iron Man one, and it was kind of interesting. It was the story and the way it displayed reminded me of like the old 60s Marvel cartoons.
Yes. Yeah, a little bit. Yep.
But the graphics reminded me of 90s video games.
Yeah.
As far as the art style. Now, as far as the writing, it seemed like there was a little bit more freedom in writing digital comics for you as opposed to printed. Did you it came across that way? Like, did you feel like you could be a little bit more adventurous there?
Are you referring to the line you sent me about like
Oh, well,
saluting?
yeah. So yeah,
Um,
so there is an interchange between Cap and Tony Stark. So he shows up, Cap shows up in a Quinjet, and he lands on the water and right next to Tony's yacht. And so Tony's there, and he's just wearing a bathing suit, and he had just had a young lady in his arms on the deck, and I said on the deck, and Cap shows up, and so the lady goes down below, and he's standing there, and Tony says something like, are you expecting me to salute you? And he says, no, you're saving the salute for the young lady. And then what? And then Tony says, well, I'll make you a copy of the video later. I mean, what? Like, I mean, this is the
What is he,
late
Rob
90s.
Lowe?
Yeah, I mean, how did this get by the editors?
Hey, listen, I don't know if I did a book called Terror Incorporated. That was
we
about a
loved it. Yeah,
mercenary,
Shrek.
Shrek, which did a crossover with Silver Sable and Luke Cage at one point, where Mark McLaurin, myself, and Greg Wright had a villain called Priapus, which is named after the Greek god or Roman god of sex. So we got away with that in the mainstream stuff. Nobody, bought, and there. So that was minor in comparison. No, I mean nobody did pay attention to that stuff. In the sense that God loved Marvel in many ways, but much like when I worked with Epic, I think with the cyber comic stuff, they weren't real comics, right? To a lot of people, right? They weren't part of the regular line, so it didn't matter that you were using the same characters or even referencing maybe things that were happening. If you wanted to do that, although we were mostly out of continuity or maybe doing what if type stories or timeline change type stories. But nobody was paying attention in that regard. But the editor, wasn't being careless about things. I think, it was just figuring, hey, let's just have some fun. Does the story work? Does it fit the vibe of the character? Does it feel like it's in line with the characters? Is it a good adventure? Is it working with the programming limitations, that we had? Like you said, the art was more like 90s video game animation, because also you have to remember that you're on like a 14.4 28K modem at most for most people. So the art had to be very simplified so that the file size would be as small as possible, to be able to get across anybody's phone line and it'd still be the same century.
Yeah.
So
right.
that's why, you know, certain things looked, why we didn't have voices, you know, that type of thing. Not that we ever really talked about that, but they were fun stories to do, you know, and I felt like we tried, I know I tried to again be true to the characters. You know, who is Cap in this? Cap is very much Cap in my mind. You know, Stark is very much, Stark. We didn't try to compromise the characters at all. We just were playing with them in a different format, or telling an adventure that nobody had known about before.
Mm-hmm. So Dan, we've got some questions from a handful of our listeners, if you'd be willing. So Grant Baugh, and I know we've talked about this a little previously, talking about Steve Rogers and how you got into Steve's head, but he wants to know that, you know, when you're about to start writing a story for a character that maybe you haven't done before, what are some of the things that you do to prepare to better understand those characters?
Sure. I mean, we referenced a little bit, you know, as I said, I read around the character, you know, who is working on that. And something I think that was really important for what works in Blood and Glory, you know, as a reference point, you know, for this conversation, is you know, we looked at that as them as being soldiers, right? There were two captains from two different wars. So I read extensively around World War II soldiers, watched Frank Capra's World War II documentaries or propaganda films, and you know, read some of the seminal works around Vietnam soldiers, you know, returning soldiers and the mentality around that, to try to get into their heads. So I was approaching them, and of course, as we talked about before, how we kill, you know, but that was important as a driver for the character. You know, not I never looked at Castle as just a vigilante. I always looked at him as this horribly driven character. But in answer to that particular question, it was what can make these soldiers come to life as much as anything else, you know. So that was kind of finding a theme for that book, and I would keep that in my mind whenever I would write Cap after that. I mean, I had a Daredevil story, I think it came after that, you know, where he Tree of Knowledge, where Cap played a pretty extensive role, and that Cap is who's in my mind throughout that, and him and Daredevil have a fairly prescient debate about like the early digital rights and, like, you know, and liberties, and you know.
I don't think I've told you this, Dan, but Daredevil, he's my number 2.
Oh, wow.
So,
all right.
Yeah. So I have in my personal collection, I have Captain America 100 to current, and then all the Tales of Suspense stories. Daredevil, I'm only missing 3 issues from 1 to current.
Wow.
So
wow.
Yeah, he's my number 2. So I'm a big fan of your 4 years on Daredevil. Just as a side note.
Thank you.
I mean, the fall, the Kingpin, you know, was, you know, which culminated in issue 300. Amazing story. And it was very true to the character. It captured a lot of the elements that Frank Miller had set up in both his, you know, his writing, you know, that he had done before Fall from Grace and things like that. So, and then later with your work with Scott McDaniel, you know, was amazing too. So I, as a Cap and Daredevil fan, seeing the 2 of them in the series together was a highlight for me.
Awesome. Great. Well, that's that's terrific. Thank you very much, Rick. And but hopefully, Rob, that answers that listener's question, or at least gives them something to think about.
So Mark Domeyer asks, for crossover series like Punisher Cap, do they come about because someone pitches an idea, or does Marvel say, you know, the Punisher is such a hot commodity, like you said in the beginning of our talk, so come up with an idea?
It can go either way. I think today, from my understanding, there's a lot more editorial maybe control or decision making around certain things like that, and certainly there was, back in my heyday for that reason. Hey, Wolverine's super popular. Let's do 6 more Wolverine stories and figure it out here. Punisher was extraordinarily popular at that time.
He had
extraordinarily
3
popular.
ongoing series.
Right.
3 ongoing
right.
series when you wrote the Blood and Glory.
Yep. And so that was, as I referenced before, commercially driven by myself and Margaret, in the sense that we wanted to kind of get our profile higher within the Marvel, echelon. We wanted to hopefully make some money, so we pitched the idea loosely to Klaus, who we were friendly with. We were trying to kind of steal some of Klaus's thunder, because he's coming off of Dark Knight, and I mean, just Klaus is great anyway, but Dark Knight didn't hurt. So we're trying to steal that thunder. So we go in and we pitch this. We pitch that one directly, as commercial. It's got Klaus, it's got Punisher. Cap's a little less commercial, frankly, at that point, but
it's true.
But still, a prominent Marvel character. And we got them to buy off on it. Now, the weird thing was with that whole thing was, and it didn't, I think, take away or add to the sales in one way or the other, but Klaus then did take an extraordinarily long time to get to the book. Not that he was slow, but he had a lot of other commitments, or it wasn't on his radar, and editorial wasn't pushing him. So we had actually written those plots quite a ways before we had gotten around to him doing the artwork and then scripting them, which, True Confessions, part of your program, and I sort of referenced this earlier, but Margaret and I had started out writing just as professionals. We had gotten into a romantic relationship, through the course of working together and getting to know each other. But then by the time that story was finished, that relationship had ended, not necessarily great. And so the scripting of that story, and the scripting works pretty well, was done in that same way I described before, but we were on barely speaking terms beyond speaking around that book, which was a very weird place to be.
Wow, that's a little inside baseball there. Yeah, interesting.
And so the gap of time, that Klaus had again taken for various reasons, a lot had changed around that. But with crossovers like that, they can come either way. But in that case, we had pitched it and pitched it, for commercial reasons. But once you get the go ahead, I think then it's on you to find the why of it. What is really driving the story? What's really driving the characters, more than just, give me some cheddar, give me some money. Not that you can't do that, but for us, it especially meant more setting the story up.
Well, not too many people know this, but see, Bob and I actually are no longer on speaking terms either. So it's kind of
you guys. This is the only time you talk, right? You just get on. Yeah, it's well done. Well done.
Tell Rick I'm tired of his typewriter stories.
I'm going to put that in the chat. So
So another listener, Chester Cox, he wants to know. He asks, both Frank and Matt have exhibited different personality types in the decades of their comic life. Do you feel an obligation to pass continuity? And if so, how far past?
I'm sorry, both Frank and
Frank
Matt?
Castle and Matt Murdock.
Okay.
Well, okay. I think it's Frank and Steve, shouldn't it be? Right? Because that's what
I don't know.
I know. I think Chester meant Frank and Steve have exhibited different personality types in their, so when you're writing this, how far in the past continuity do you feel you need to go for their personalities?
Right. No, that's a good question. In the case of a standalone book like this, I think we were freer from the specific continuity. So we didn't have to kind of reference back to, or even what's going on right then. What the hell is Cap doing in his book at the moment, or what the hell is Punisher doing in his many books at the moment? We weren't doing, a sort of a pickup like that. we had the luxury of telling a very standalone story. So it was more important that we do things that are true to the character identity, the character persona, and those sort of things. You know, does he still feel like a Punisher, even though this is my version of the Punisher, Margaret's version of the Punisher? Does it still feel like Cap, even though it's our version of Cap and not Mark Grinwald's version of Cap or somebody else's? So we had a little bit of, I would say a lot of leash to play out our version of it. But we were pretty, we had good editors, but we also, I think, were pretty severe judges of ourselves to sort of want to, if you want to play with the character, then don't disrespect the character, right? Sure. That was, I think, like an important way we would approach it.
All right. One last question from our listeners. Andrew Meyer asks, you did an excellent job showing the morality differences between Cap and the Punisher. Do you feel that this dynamic of hero versus vigilante is so strong that this is the reason stories such as these, and then he gives an example, Cap versus Wolverine, Daredevil versus Punisher, etc., that stories such as these withstand the test of time and continue to be popular with readers?
It's a great question. I would say, though, that we sort of touched upon a few times. I didn't look at it as hero vigilante. I mean, I can remember that, even to now. And if I go back and reread the story, which I had to, not, for some of this and a little bit before for something else, we looked at it as soldiers again, soldiers from different wars, and they had, now those wars had different, if not true moralities, at least the identity of moralities, or different things as drivers behind them. So I think that's more what drives a story like this is that essence of who they are, versus one is a hero and one is a vigilante. Neither one of them, and they go through a kind of a crossover. I mean, Cap does not become a vigilante in the story by any stretch of the imagination,
right?
Although I guess technically he is, right? Or as they say in the MCU, he's a war criminal now, isn't he? But there's that starting off where you're a Boy Scout or you're a tool of the government and you're a killing machine and you're part of the problem, to then that sort of semi-mutual respect as, we're two officers from different wars. And even, I mean, it's a short scene, but I mean, I was very pleased with like the end scene where they salute each other. To me, that's a big moment. I wish we had given a little bit more attention to, even in retrospect, but it still works. And he tells him at the end, Captain, Castle, and he salutes him. That's a, and that's the kind of thing that probably nobody ever picks up on again. I don't know. Has anyone ever touched on that again in the sense of a relationship between them? Maybe, maybe not. But in the moment, the world you kind of create it, you stay true to that.
So let's touch on that, because I don't know if you know this. Bob is a 25-year Marine veteran. And,
okay.
By the way, Bob, was that a good salute? I
knew you were going to ask that. In fact, I was just going to
he has a pet peeve about the artist.
Oh, I was going to say, it was pretty good. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was pretty good there in that last panel.
We didn't get many letters on the book because it wasn't a book with a letter column. But I wish I'd kept it to this day. One of the best letters maybe I ever got was from a veteran who just pointed out he was acknowledging that we got the steps right at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. That we had done of our homework to sort of play that scene out with the 21 steps and such, and that was all.
And then
market,
the 21 seconds.
Yeah. So the fact we kind of gave that its due, he just thanked us for that, which I said, oh, A, somebody noticed, and B, it was right to do that. It was right to give it that extra, time as a scene.
So, all right. So I have to bring this up because, you said that you think of, when you think of Steve Rogers, when you think of Captain America, you think of a soldier. Now, and that's perfectly fine. That's what he was in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at, for example, the Ed Brubaker run in
Mm-hmm.
2005, that that went on for 5 years, he was more of a soldier in that
Mm-hmm.
run. But if you look at Mark Grunwald,
Mm-hmm.
J.M. DeMatteis, Mark Wade, Grant, they had a more of a as a superhero rather than a
Mm-hmm.
super soldier.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of a debate. Would Steve look at a killer like the Punisher, and would he salute him, showing a sign of respect to a person that he doesn't agree with on his methods? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, as the writer who prompted this of Steve saluting Frank,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think prompted Steve to do that? And was it, again, coming from a more, obviously, as you said, from a soldier's perspective?
I think again, I had the luxury, with Margaret, of telling a self-contained tale, right? And I didn't have to worry about maintaining a monthly schedule, for years on end, where you're charged with, you can't just keep telling like soldier stories, right? Probably just in its own way. You got to mix in some superhero stuff, and broaden the character in a way, maybe. But to me, in thinking about it that way, and again, reading the research that we had done about Vietnam soldiers, about World War II soldiers, about the crossover personas of some of those people. That didn't all go into the book, but there were certain overlaps there that, to me and Margaret, I think said, um, these are not that different in a lot of ways. And if they've just gone through this adventure together, in this battle, and then they decided to bind forces over pushing back on, these dictators and this cartel and these corrupt officers, within this shadow, organization. How can you not have respect for the person you're fighting alongside? So, and at the same rank, at a certain sense of mutual understanding, in comic book ism, next week they'll be slugging it out again, I guess.
Right.
But it it felt true, and I think it still feels true to me, the vibe of it. And sometimes that's how I know stories work, at least for me, is when the moments take over themselves. Like that felt to me as if it was as natural as, drinking a glass of water, as opposed to us forcing it in. Oh, we got to have them salute because they're soldiers, right? It suddenly becomes this. The biggest debates I had with Lee Weeks, like almost a shouting match, was at the end of Daredevil 300, where Daredevil's won out over the Kingpin, and there's a long, monologue he sort of does, and he at the end of it he says, "I forgive you." And Lee ripped into me like you would not believe. Like, you can't have him say he forgives him. You can't. There's no way this works. Blah 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 blah. And I got to say, well, I'm the writer. I get to have him say whatever he wants. But it was also, it just kind of came out of it. It came out of the moment. It came out of the feeling of who's the character beyond, the tough guy vigilante with the billy clubs who beats people, into submission, and who's the Catholic with the guilt, and who's this and who's that. And the best moments of those stories and others, I think, kind of come out of that white heat flow. So the salute, to me, does he agree with him on 90% of the fronts? No, but at the essence of why he does things, does he do them for the right reason? Castle, to me, is not an indiscriminate killer. At least I never wrote him that way, or thought of him that way. He could be thought of that way. He's a troubled soldier on a mission that's never gonna end.
Right.
And that's what kind of worked, for that moment in time.
Fair enough. I think that's an excellent answer.
I do too. Yeah.
I was afraid you guys were, going to cut me off or attack me. I don't. Yeah, it's just it's an interesting thing to think about, though. When you start to pick apart these characters, and those aspects of them, which is really when they do become the most interesting.
Yeah, and I think and I'm assuming you haven't served in the military, but I think the essence of what that salute means, or what a salute means, it can mean a number of different things. It's like a handshake, right? It can mean a number of different things. And in that moment, in that panel, it meant a certain thing to two individuals that it may not have meant 5 pages earlier, or in a different situation, or in a different context.
Right.
And I think that's something that you captured, that maybe a lot of readers just wouldn't get that if they didn't have that experience, but it certainly struck me that way.
That's great to hear. Thank you very much for sharing that, because that was, I think, what we were trying to go for. Not just say, oh, the two soldiers, let them salute each other, but it is that, and I think that's a great way of putting it. 5 pages earlier, 2 scenes earlier, no. 10 pages later, or the next time they meet, no. But here, and Cap is not, while it was never played up, if you want to do the math, did he go through all of World War II, never killing anybody, or never seeing anybody die, or, never partaking in violence? Yes, he did. But, they play that up now, in more modern times. But I thank you, Bob. Really, it means a lot, hearing that, from you as somebody who served, and seeing it in the way that we hope that it would come across.
Yeah. But the question I really wanted to ask is, though, so I went back and, did a little reading as well, a little research, and I came across that short little blurb in issue 230 of volume 2 of Marvel Tales back in 1989, where they asked you a bunch of questions. And one of them they asked you was, if they were going to make a movie of your life, who would you like to play you? And you said Dick York, William Shatner, or Vincent Price. And I want to know,
they're all the same, right?
Pretty much.
Have you updated your preferences since then? And if so, who would you choose?
It'd be. I was nefarious to the point of stupidity in terms of like in jokes. But so the Shatner one, I don't know why the Shatner one. Having met Shatner in the years in between, I don't know if I'd want to be played by him anymore. All
right, hold on now. This is a whole new podcast. No. Chichester talks about Shatner.
At least 2 of those are just in jokes with my good friend Greg Wright, because his colorist and editor and such. Because we joke about Shatner a lot and just his way of speech, and Greg, the fact I'm friends with him, 40 years later. This guy, when I met him in college, would incessantly go on that I looked like Dick York, the character from Bewitched.
Right, yeah.
Which may be true. I don't know. I've never seen it, but he has not let that dog lie for 35, 40 years, plus of.
Was he the second Darren? He was the second Darren, right?
Yes.
I don't even know.
He was a longer version.
Yeah, the first guy is Sergeant, right?
Right. Dick Sargent.
Dick Sargent.
But he would not let this go, so I had to slug that in there. And Vincent Price, I just loved the hell out of Vincent Price. Probably Vincent Price would be the one that it looks nothing like me, that I'm nothing like him. But if you're going to be played by somebody, I would pick up on Price and still hold him up there.
He'd do a good job. I'm sure he'd do a good job. Were he still alive, he'd do a great job.
Were he still alive? Yes.
That brings me to a second question. I wasn't going to ask this, but I gotta know.
Hold on, Bob. We have to figure out who would play him now.
Oh, all right.
Okay. And if you put a little bit thicker eyebrows on Dan.
Right.
That's hard to imagine. Have you seen these things?
Hold on. Well, when I tell you, just slightly thicker. Okay? We get Eugene Levy to play him.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. All right. I like that, actually. Yeah. Yeah, you have to give Eugene a haircut, but yeah.
There would be again worse things than Eugene Levy.
Right.
That would be fine by me. Big fan.
All right. Well, I got to ask it. I wasn't going to ask it, but it's been bugging me. And you've gotten in my head. This is like 24 years later, and an answer to one of your questions has gotten into my head. So in the last question, you said the question was, the one thing I really want the world to know about me. And you wrote, go to minute 21 of episode 5 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, walking distance. Which I
did. And what is there? There must be something.
And I couldn't figure it out. But so I watched the whole episode, and now you've got me binge watching all 5 seasons on Paramount Plus.
I've succeeded at my mission.
Yes.
I do love walking distance. I probably arbitrarily picked that time frame out, but that is a great episode, and I do think that that whole idea of turning back to the things that you want it to be, and then recognizing that you can't, and you have to sort of move on, was a theme that I probably played into even before I recognized it. So it might have been a quip, but I usually find some of the things that I quipped about are frighteningly more informed. I made a film in film school where NYU was a very artistically driven film school. It wasn't commercially driven at all. And me and my cronies, Greg was one of them, we again wanted to be the Spielbergs, the Lucases of the next generation. So we were the most commercially oriented crew maybe in the building at the time. And this one professor, she was just independent film all the time. And the assignment was make an abstract film, make an enchant de lait, sort of thing, or whatever. And I said, I am going to throw every bullshit trope at the screen in this thing. I'm gonna have a guy talking to an orange. I am gonna I'm gonna have people playing chess, and when they knock the chess pieces over, you hear breaking glass. Just bullshit bizarre imagery that has nothing to do with anything. And I'm laughing to myself as I'm making this. And then when we looked at the edit, and I had just broken up with this girl, woman, and had been distraught over it. My cronies all looked at me and like, yeah, that's every scene of, heartache and angst you're going through right now. So even though I desperately tried to make it about nothing, it ended up being about all this nonsense I was going through. So sometimes you can't escape.
It sounds like the pitch for Seinfeld.
Yeah, exactly. Right, it's about nothing. It's about everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you anyway for getting me to dive back into Twilight Zone after all these years. And
that is not time wasted. That is not time wasted. No.
So, we like to play this game on the show, Dan. It's the what if game. So, what if you had never left comics in 1999? What might have happened?
The mullet might still be in fashion. That was. I think I personally, or is this like one of these world-changing things? Like if Thanos hadn't come to Earth, the whole galaxy would blow up. It
might have been world-changing. Who knows? But I mean, personally, yeah.
I think I would be. I don't think I'd be as good a writer as I am today, frankly. I overcame over the course of time that feeling that, I always thought I was a really good editor, and I thought I was kind of getting by as a writer and sort of fooling people, a little bit of imposter syndrome and whatever. And while there was a great deal of not writing for myself and writing, all sorts of things that may not matter in terms of, marketing and advertising, over the years, the sheer discipline of it and the sheer, in working with other people and having to kind of craft stories and elements, and then at various different roles, help people discover that about themselves. When I was maybe in a more creative director, role or better, I became a much, much, much better storyteller and a much more disciplined storyteller. I mean, I still have my bad days and, suddenly say it's 5 o'clock and I got nothing done. But I think it was the best thing that could have happened to me in that regard, and has allowed me now to sort of step back into, some steps of more of my own creative work, better prepared, better able to realize. It would have been great to sort of like continue to do some things along the way. Yes. Should I have done that? And not just been so black and white about, well, I'm done with that, I'm going over here. Yes, but you learn not to pay too much attention to hindsight is 2020 and just kind of move forward with it.
So now you're back, you're finding your way back. It's right, full circle here, right? You're finding your way back to comics. So what is keeping you busy nowadays? Are there any upcoming projects we can share with the listeners?
Yeah, well, there's one secret project we can't share with anybody. But we know there's a secret project, but there's actually Black Box Comics, which is a smaller publisher, but has a pretty big line of comics of all different genres and stuff. Their publisher and editor Dimitrios Zaharakis contacted me last summer and asked me to co-develop a character with him. So it's a little bit of a dystopian future heist thriller sort of thing. Got a little bit of science fiction, a little bit of a thriller, as I said, kind of attitude to it. I don't think we've settled on a name for it. But I just finished all 5 scripts of that, so that's 100+ pages of comics, and he just got an artist beginning the character design. So I anticipate the next, I don't know what his time frame is, but say the next 6 months or whatever. And then I've had a long gestating Kickstarter project, which was originally called Route 666 a long time ago, but is now called Axel's Infernal, which is kind of about a bunch of the simplified version would be sort of like truckers from hell. But I've had it described as like The Good Place meets From Dusk Till Dawn, which I like better.
Oh, I like that. That's good marketing right there.
Right there,
That's good marketing right there. So the full issue of that is done. We're wrapping up the lettering. I've got a lot of top talent on that, and it looks great. And I'm hoping to do that Kickstarter within the next couple of months. I've got to square up some of the edges around that, but I don't have a link to that or anything yet, but that's something that'll be coming out. I would hope within the next again 4 to 5 months, the first issue of what would be a 5-issue story. So we're going to do the first one, and then hopefully it gets a little bit of heat, and then we can kind of come back to the well every couple of months and bug people again.
That's cool. So getting back to Black Box Comics, when will that your story come out on there?
I don't, there's no time frame that I'm told, but I'm just kind of projecting in my head that he just got I finished it. I mean, I'm still going to participate in the the discussions around it, but since he just got an artist going on it, I'm guessing I would guess turn of the year, end of the year, sort of that thing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm on their website right now, blackboxcomics.net.
Yeah, they got a lot of titles. I mean, quite a few,
and some good creators out there too. I mean,
yeah,
your old partner, Scott McDaniel.
Yep, he did one of the first ones. Chuck Dixon's done stuff for them.
Andy Owens.
Yep. And a lot of new folks, and some of the stuff is really, I mean, it all looks good, I think. And from the stories I've read and my discussions, with Dimitrios, they've got a good vibe. So I've had a lot of fun with it. It's a genre I hadn't specifically worked in before. And it was a lot of world building to kind of get it to where it needs to be. But
I find that hard to believe, a genre you haven't worked in before, because I was looking at your list of work in the 90s, and there were some times where you were putting out 3 or 4 titles a month.
Oh yeah.
And in October of 1991, you had 5 books come out. And talk about a span of genres. Okay. All right. We have Clive Barker's Hellraiser, number 9. Then along that theme, we had Hellraiser, Nightbreed, Jihad #1. So you have horror covered with those two, right?
Oh yeah.
Then you get into Daredevil 299, which was the whole Fall of the Kingpin story, right? So you have your superhero. You have your Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. #30, which is, going off into the spy genre.
Yeah.
And then just for the hell of it, you have American Tail. Fievel Goes West #1.
Yes. I love that book. That was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Right. I mean, where's the American Tail meets Hellraiser? I mean, like, that's
a little Night Nurse in there would have been good.
Yeah. I mean, talk about a different genres. What genre have you not done?
I just realized I hadn't done a lot of a good Conan run, like a good Sword and Sorcerer. I was talking
that'd
to,
be cool. Yeah.
The Black Box guys around some idea they had there as well. So that might be a follow-up to this one I just finished, but that's TBD. But yeah, I've been fortunate with being able to play in a lot of different things like that, and I think that's something that got better again over the years by having so many different assignments in marketing for so many different clients. You just have to apply yourself to what's the task at hand and change your voice, and as long as you find something in there that you can be interested in, right? That's the driver. That's where you get the passion. When you feel like and I've been there at the, depending on what we all do, we've all been there. But, when you find yourself on autopilot, just walk away from it, right? When you're just kind of, even if you could do it on a serviceable level, like when you're just cranking it out, there's going to be nothing there for you or the readers.
Got it. Well, how can fans, what's the best way for fans to follow you? So when that secret project does come out, they can be one of the first to know.
Yeah. I mean, I run a newsletter, which I've been good and bad at. I'm good at it again right now. So let's commit to that. So if folks visit storymaze.substack.com, that comes out every couple of weeks, I'll say. That's a good zone of time.
What can they expect to find in that newsletter?
It's either short pieces of original fiction or things about writing, like creative inspirations. Okay. It's usually something short, kind of a pointer about something that I've found that I really like, which could be everything from a book or a movie or a video game. I let the story telling aspect of it go pretty wide, and then usually a little bit of what's been comics nostalgia, I'll say, in terms of like I'll return to the scene of the crime on in a particular book, or break down a little backstory around what went on in this issue of Daredevil, or what went on in this issue of Hardware, or something like that. But that section is probably going to equally open up into some of this new stuff, where I'll play that out as well.
Excellent. All right, we'll have to sign up for that, and we'll make sure to include a link in the show notes.
Thank you. Yep. It'd be great.
All right. One last question, because when we had Jim Shooter on, we had J.M. DeMatteis on. Now, I know you're going to say, what? Mark DeMatteis? No, J.M. DeMatteis. And I'll tell you, so that's how he pronounced his name when he was on the show. This is J.M. DeMatteis. And when I said that to Jim Shooter, he goes, what? No, he was DeMatteis.
Yeah, I know.
And I heard you say earlier, no, it's Mark DeMatteis. So did he change how he pronounced his own name?
Maybe. I've heard that second way, and I've corrected people on that. But I mean, having worked with him as his editor and specifically, called him and blah, blah, blah. I mean, he never corrected me. And back in the day, he was a very intimidating figure. So I assume he would have corrected me then.
Listen, he still is a little intimidating. I got to tell you, when we had him on the show, Bob will tell you, we asked him in the beginning to do the intro, right?
Yeah.
And then we said, hey, if you want to do a second take, something, whatever, just like we did with you. He was like, no, let's just get to the interview.
I'm good. Right. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
And I
No,
was
let's
just like,
move on.
okay.
Yeah. So,
But he
he's
was
a
so
great by
no.
the end,
He-
though. Yeah.
Yeah, he warmed up at the end. He's a
Yeah.
great
Oh,
guy.
he's a incredibly thoughtful writer
He,
and just talented beyond. So however the hell he wants to pronounce his name, I'll back it up. But yeah, I mean, I knew him as Mark Damatis, so I mean, that's
right.
but
That's
whatever,
too funny.
whenever next time I run into him, I'll stick with maybe just Mark and let's just
Yeah.
skate past there.
Play it safe.
Yeah.
I mean, for an idiot who goes around by DG Chichester, I'm not one to cast aspersions on like
Yeah.
the
Oh, no, no.
JMs of the world.
We had to call him JM. So
Yeah, okay, yeah. So there you go. He's
Yeah.
got his brand and he knows what he wants to do with it.
Yeah.
Yep. Perfect. And listen, as a marketing guy, you know all about branding.
There you go. Yep, you got to keep it consistent.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for coming on the show. We had
My
a
pleasure.
learning more about your career and Rapid Cap with you.
Yeah, this was terrific, guys. Thank you very much. A lot of fun conversation, really great questions. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to listening to the edit and however you want to pronounce my name. Have at it.
Sounds good. All right, Bob. That was a great conversation with Dan. What a true professional, true gentleman, and some fun stories.
It was, yeah, and some real insights too. I really appreciate like the thoughtfulness of some of his answers, right? I mean, he really paused and gave it some real thought, of what we and some of the listeners were asking him. And I really appreciate that because, it's like a completely alien occupation to me. And not
Writing
just
comics?
writing comics, but just writing in general for a living. And so it's really neat for me, to just sort of like hear like how that actually plays out in somebody's life. So that's neat, and I really like the fact that it reminded me of when we talked to Paulo Rivera, sort of the depth of the research that Dan throws himself into in order to prep. It's not just reading the comics that came before, but he talked about reading history books and watching documentaries and other films and really trying to steep himself in the topic material in order to better grasp the characters. So, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Now, 100%. It's so funny, just the parallels between him and my career, right? We both went to school with the idea that we were going to someday write and direct, and then we end up getting into various things. I got in, we both got into some sort of comic book career. He got into assistant editing and then editing and writing. I got into promoting conventions and then owning a store and things like that. And then we both left the comic book industry to get into marketing and working at advertising agencies and working in pharma and things like that. And then yet we're still, the comic industry still draws to us both dearly, I'm with the Facebook group and the podcast and the art, and he's back writing again.
It's like the mob.
It's kind of interesting, right?
It's like the mob, right? Just when you think you're out, they
pull you back in.
Yeah, you can't ever escape that orbit. So.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're the better for it.
No, of course. Yeah. I mean, we can't wait to check out Dan's new work and see what he's got going. Would love to, to see, he talked about the different genres, and here we are, he's trying something new. I respect that. I totally respect that. And I wish him the best of luck, and I hope people check it out.
Yeah. I like that what he said that, and I'm not sure any of us, well, not most of us anyway. When he said when it stops, well, I can't remember the exact wording, but basically paraphrasing here, when it stops being interesting and exciting, and
you start phoning it in.
Yeah, when you start phoning in, it's time to move on and try something different. And maybe some of us, we can't always do that, or we don't have the courage to do that, but it's nice to hear people remind us about the world of possibilities out there, and just trying new things and trying to be authentic to oneself and, one's aspirations.
Yep. I agree 100%. All right. So come back next episode. We are in part 6, Bob. Part 6 of the Castaway in Dimension Z. That has been ramping up, getting riveting. The Rick Remender and John Remender Jr. and Klaus Jensen, who Chichester was talking about earlier in this episode. They are ramping it up. This story is getting incredibly interesting and exciting and quite frankly, impactful, as far as long lasting into the Steve Rogers Captain America mythos.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to diving back in. It feels like a long pause in between our revisits to Dimension Z. So I find myself getting antsy now. To jump back in.
Well, we only have 3 parts left, so yeah, and we only have 3 intros to you left, where I have to tie it in with the letter Z. What do you think is going to be next time, Bob?
Who can tell? Who can tell?
Yeah.
Who can tell?
Come back, episode 145 and find out. Yeah. All right, everybody. He's Bob Lucius. I'm Rick Verbanis. You have been listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.